Your lack ends tonight. The divine law of supply. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the moment you stop describing your lack out loud, you stop feeding it, and you, right now, tonight, are closer to the end of it than you have ever been. There is a verse tucked inside the 23rd Psalm, and it says this: "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." From the Book of Psalms, chapter 23, verse 1, and Florence Scovel Shinn would stop you right there and say, do you see what the sentence actually claims? It does not say the Lord is my shepherd, and someday, eventually, when things improve, I shall not want. It says, I shall not want, now, in the present tense, because the supply was arranged before the hunger was even felt. And here is where nearly everyone misses the whole teaching. They believe want is a condition of the bank account, when want is only ever a condition of belief, spoken out of the mouth, again and again, evening after evening, until it hardens into something that looks, to the naked eye, like an unmovable fact, but a fact it has never been, only a habit wearing the mask of one. So before we go one step further, let us plant a new word where the old one used to live. Say it with me. I am the child of a shepherd who never sleeps. My supply flows to me swiftly and without delay. My word is my wand. Again, I am the child of a shepherd who never sleeps. My supply flows to me swiftly and without delay. My word is my wand. And if something in you just went quiet when you heard that, if some old tired place in your chest loosened even a little, type the two words, God supplies, into the comments right now. Before we go any further, let it be your seal on everything that is about to be said. The first key is, lack is never a fact. It is only a belief spoken so often and so casually that it starts to look like the truth. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the tongue is a creative instrument, that every sentence you release carries the same authority as a decree spoken from a throne, and that whatever you decree over your own life, morning after morning, becomes the working law of your experience, whether you meant it as law or not. Think of how casually the words slip out. I can never get ahead. There is never enough to go around here. Money just runs through my fingers. Each one sounds like a complaint. But Florence Scovel Shinn would tell you plainly, it is not a complaint. It is a small, dark prayer, prayed in the language of lack, and answered in exact and faithful kind. Picture a woman at her kitchen counter, bills spread under the lamp, sighing the same 4 words she has sighed for years. There is never enough. She believes she is only describing her life. She does not realize she is renewing the lease on it, and she has said it so many times it no longer feels like a sentence at all. It feels like weather, something that simply happens to her, the way rain happens to a rooftop. And that is exactly how a belief becomes disguised as a fact, not through one dramatic moment, but through quiet repetition. It is not that your account balance decides what you are allowed to say about it. It is that what you say about it decides what the balance becomes. Consider her neighbor down the hall. Same modest income, same rising costs. But when asked how she is doing, she says instead, I am doing well. Supply always finds me. And though her circumstances look nearly identical, her days do not feel identical at all, because she is filing a new claim instead of renewing the old lease. So here is the first practical shift, and you can begin it tonight. Before you fall asleep, listen for the next lack sentence that tries to leave your mouth, and instead of letting it fall out unguarded, catch it, hold it a moment, and speak its opposite. Not to lie to yourself, but to reclaim the authority that was always yours. So if the old sentence is there is never enough, let the new one be, supply is already on its way to me, said quietly, said plainly, said as though you already half believe it, because you will grow into fully believing it the more you speak it. This is the exact mechanism Florence Scovel Shinn pointed to again and again. The word made flesh. The sentence made circumstance. Pause for a moment right now and notice the one lack sentence you reach for most often, the one so familiar it barely registers as words anymore, and simply let it surface, without shame, only recognition, because you cannot change a sentence you refuse to notice. So tonight, let the report change. I release the lack I have spoken, and I speak supply instead. The second key is, what you bless multiplies, and what you curse diminishes. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that gratitude is a magnet, that the moment you speak well of a thing, however small, you widen the channel through which more of its kind can travel toward you, and the moment you speak against a thing, you pinch that same channel closed. This sounds almost too simple to matter, and that is exactly why so many people never test it. They assume the law must be complicated to be true, when in fact, its very simplicity is what allows it to work quietly in every corner of an ordinary life, without ever announcing itself. Consider a man who has worked at the same company for 6 years, cashing a paycheck he calls modest, calling it that with a curl of the lip every single time it lands. He speaks of it as barely enough, as a joke, as proof the company undervalues him, and 6 years pass, and the paycheck has moved only a little. Now consider a different man, same modest paycheck, who each time it lands, says quietly, "Thank you, this is good. This is supply moving toward me." He is not pretending it is more than it is. He is simply refusing to curse what is real in front of him. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this refusal to curse is itself an act of faith. Faith being the substance out of which every increase is eventually built. It is not the size of the blessing that determines whether it grows. It is the tone in which you receive it. A small check received with real thanksgiving behaves differently in your life than a large check received with resentment. This may sound impossible to the logical mind. The logical mind wants to say, $1 is $1. But Florence Scovel Shinn was not teaching arithmetic. She was teaching consciousness. And consciousness, unlike arithmetic, responds to feeling. Think of a woman who kept a small garden behind her apartment. Year after year she complained about the soil, calling it thin, calling it stubborn, calling it hardly worth the effort. And year after year the garden gave back exactly what her words described. Thin yields, stubborn growth, hardly worth the effort. And then one season, tired of her own complaining, she began instead to thank the soil each morning before she even watered it, thanking it for whatever it was already quietly doing beneath the surface. And she was startled, not because the soil changed overnight, but because within a single season it began giving back more generously than it ever had in the years of complaint before it. This is the same law moving through a coat, a paycheck, a garden, a home. It does not care which form of supply it is asked to multiply. It only cares whether it is blessed or cursed while passing through your hands. Think of an old coat, worn at the cuffs, that you have complained about all winter, calling it shabby, calling it an embarrassment, and think instead of blessing that same coat, thanking it for the warmth it has faithfully given you through every storm. One attitude keeps you circling in the same worn coat for another 5 winters. The other attitude, strange as it sounds, opens the very door through which a new coat eventually walks in, because you are no longer holding the old one in a chokehold of contempt. You have released it in peace, and what is released in peace makes room. This is the whole secret behind Florence Scovel Shinn's teaching, that supply follows appreciation the way water follows a slope, downhill, without struggle, without straining, simply because the path has been made lower and easier in that direction. It is not that blessing forces more to come. It is that cursing was the only thing ever holding more back. So try this week. Take the thing in your life you complain about most freely, your car, your apartment, your paycheck, your work, and instead of the familiar complaint, speak one sentence of blessing over it before you sleep tonight, not because it is perfect, but because blessing is the doorway, and cursing is the wall. And you get to choose, every single evening, which one you build. I bless what I have, and it multiplies before my eyes. The third key is, the shepherd fills the field before you ever see the flock arrive. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that supply is never manufactured after the need shows up. It is already standing ready, complete, waiting only for your recognition to walk through the gate and claim it. This reverses almost everything the anxious mind believes. The anxious mind believes it must first see the money, then it will believe, then it will finally relax. But the psalm does not read that way. It does not say, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall want until he gets around to it." It says, "I shall not want." Now, because the field was seeded long before the lamb ever felt its first pang of hunger. Think of how differently one ordinary week unfolds depending on which order you believe in. On Monday, a bill arrives sooner than expected. If you believe the field is empty, that bill lands like a stone. You spend Tuesday and Wednesday rehearsing the shortfall, checking the account 3 times a day, as though checking it might change what is written there. But if you believe the field was already filled, the same bill arrives. You still notice it, you still write it down, but underneath, there is a steadiness, a quiet knowing that the means to meet it are already assigned, already moving toward you along a path you cannot yet see. And by Thursday, something shifts. An invoice gets paid early. A forgotten refund lands. A friend repays an old debt at exactly the right moment. The anxious woman calls this luck. Florence Scovel Shinn called it the field simply catching up to a recognition already granted days before. Picture a woman who needs a new job within 30 days. She spends those 30 days scanning listings with her jaw tight, believing the job does not yet exist and must be hunted down like prey in a bare landscape, refreshing postings before her coffee is even finished, falling asleep exhausted from chasing something she has convinced herself is not yet there. Now picture a different woman, same 30 days, same need, but she believes the position is already prepared, already written into the accounts of the universe, and that her only work is to walk in the confident expectation of one who knows she has already been provided for. She still updates her resume, still sends the message, still shows up for the interview, but unhurried, almost light-hearted, the way a guest walks toward a table she already knows has been set with her name on the card. One woman hunts a stranger through fog. The other walks toward an appointment already kept for her, and desperation repels while expectancy invites. It is not that the field is empty and you must go fill it with effort and sweat. It is that the field was filled long ago, and your only true labor is recognition, and recognition is not a feeling you wait around for. It is a decision made with your words and your posture. Long before the evidence arrives to justify it, you recognize the filled field the moment you stop describing the empty one out loud, the moment you open a bill without flinching, because flinching is simply the body confessing what the mind still secretly believes about the size of the field. This does not mean you sit idle. You still walk toward the gate, still knock on doors, still send the message, but you do it the way a person walks toward a table already set for them, rather than the way a person digs for food that may or may not be buried in the yard. One is action from faith, the other action from fear, and they produce entirely different results, even though from the outside they may look like the same busy motion. The digging woman exhausts herself and often misses the door standing open the whole time, because fear narrows the eyes even as it quickens the hands. The walking woman, unhurried, notices the door precisely because she was not too tense to see it. This is where the soft comment I asked for earlier matters, because when you type "God supplies" into the comments below, you are not asking a question, you are making a claim, declaring that the field has already been filled, and something in you settles the moment you declare it, rather than beg for it, and once it is settled even a little, you begin moving through your ordinary week, the way the second woman moved through hers, not chasing, but walking, Not digging, but arriving, right on time, at a table quietly finished, long before you ever thought to worry about it. The field was filled before I arrived. I only walk in. The fourth key is, your self-concept is the storehouse from which every check, every gift, every open door is actually drawn. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the outer life is never anything more than an exact, faithful photograph of the inner belief about who you are, not who you wish you were, not who you perform being in public, but who you privately, quietly, in the small hours, believe yourself to be. This is the deepest and most easily missed teaching in the whole of her work, because it is far easier to blame the economy, or the boss, or the timing, than to look honestly at the self-concept sitting underneath every single transaction of your day. It is not the economy that decides your portion. It is not the boss who decides your ceiling. It is the quiet, private sentence you carry about your own worth. And that sentence has been running the whole operation long before any paycheck ever confirmed or denied it. So let us walk through an ordinary day slowly, hour by hour, and watch how this storehouse actually operates. 7 in the morning, you wake, and before your feet even touch the floor, a sentence runs through your mind. Something like, "Here we go again." And already, before a single event has occurred, the day has been handed its first instruction. 9 in the morning, you check your accounts, and depending on the number you see, you either flinch or you don't, and that flinch, small as it seems, is a vote cast for the storehouse you believe you keep. Noon, you are offered a chance to speak up for a raise, or a new client, or a better rate, and something in you says, "Who am I to ask for that?" And that single sentence, spoken silently, is the self-concept declaring its own low ceiling. 3 in the afternoon, a small unexpected expense appears, a flat tire, a broken dish, and the way you receive it, whether with dread or with a strange settled calm, that reveals whether your storehouse feels rich or poor to you in that private hour. 6 in the evening, you sit to pay bills, and your hand either moves in resentment or moves in quiet trust, and that motion of the hand is not really about the bills at all. It is about what you have decided, deep beneath your own awareness, you are worth having plenty for. 9 at night, you lie down, and the last thought before sleep, whether it is a worry about tomorrow or a word of thanks for today, plants a seed that the storehouse will be tending all through the night while you rest. Do you see it now? Not $1 changed hands in that whole day, and yet the storehouse was being built or eroded in every single hour. This is what Florence Scovel Shinn meant when she taught that the subconscious mind is like fertile soil that accepts whatever seed you drop into it, without ever arguing about whether the seed is a good one. It simply grows what it is given. So if you have spent years dropping in seeds of "I am not the kind of person," things come easily to. The soil has been faithfully, obediently growing exactly that harvest. Not out of cruelty, but out of perfect obedience. And here is the part that should genuinely relieve you. If the soil is that obedient, that means it will grow the new seed with the very same faithfulness the moment you begin planting one. It is not that the storehouse is stingy. It is that it has only ever been asked for small things, and it has faithfully delivered exactly what was asked. This is worth sitting with a moment, because most people quietly believe the storehouse itself is limited, that supply is rationed somewhere far away, and their portion has simply always been thin. But Florence Scovel Shinn taught the opposite. She taught that the storehouse is never the limitation. The request is the limitation, a self-concept that says "I get by, but I never really get ahead," is not describing a stingy universe. It is placing a modest order and receiving, faithfully, a modest delivery. This is not about faking confidence you do not feel. Florence Scovel Shinn was careful never to teach empty pretending. She taught something sturdier than that. She taught that you begin by simply refusing to reinforce the old low self-concept out loud or in your private thinking, and you begin, gently, patiently, offering the mind a new description of who you actually are underneath all the old evidence. Not, I am about to become someone supply flows to, but I already am someone supply flows to. Right now, in this ordinary, unremarkable evening. Think of a woman who spent 15 years believing she was simply not a money person. She said it at parties as a joke. She said it to her children as a kind of gentle warning. She said it to herself every time a bill arrived. And her storehouse, faithful as ever, produced exactly the thin, tight life that sentence described. And then one year she stopped saying it. Not because her circumstances had changed first, but because she got tired of the sentence itself. She began saying instead, I am learning what it feels like to have enough. And she said it even on the weeks it seemed almost laughable to say. And slowly, without any single dramatic event she could point to, the tightness in her chest when bills arrived began to ease. Opportunities she would have dismissed a year earlier started to look interesting instead of impossible. A small side project she had waved away for years suddenly felt worth trying. A conversation about a raise that used to terrify her suddenly felt merely uncomfortable instead of impossible. None of this happened because a single lucky break arrived. It happened because the storehouse had quietly begun filling different shelves. This is the storehouse responding to new instructions. This is the exact mechanism Florence Scovel Shinn spent her whole teaching life pointing toward. And here is another angle worth holding up to the light. The storehouse does not only respond to what you say about money directly, it responds to what you say about yourself in every other room of your life as well. The woman who says, I am just not lucky about parking spots, and the man who says, nothing good ever happens to me on a Monday, and the friend who says, I always seem to get the short end of things. These are not harmless throwaway lines. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the subconscious does not sort your sentences by subject. It simply absorbs the tone underneath them. And a life narrated in the tone of, I am someone things are withheld from, will produce a matching pattern across every single area. Not money alone, because the storehouse is not a separate account for finances only. It is the one true source beneath every kind of supply. The parking spot, the phone call that finally comes through, the door that opens on the very day you needed it to. Pause for a moment and pick one real sentence you have caught yourself repeating about yourself this week. Not about your bank account only, but about your luck, your timing, your worth, your portion. Hold it honestly in front of you for a moment and ask plainly, is this sentence describing my life, or is it building it? Because it is not describing it. It has never once been describing it. It has been building it quietly the whole time, brick by ordinary brick, in every one of those small, unremarkable hours you barely noticed passing. So this week, I want you to catch yourself in one small daily moment. The moment you check your balance, the moment you open a bill, the moment someone asks what you do and you answer with a shrug. And in that one moment, offer the storehouse a slightly better sentence than the one you have offered it for years. You do not need to overhaul your whole identity in a single evening. You only need to stop confirming the old one quite so faithfully and begin, even shakily, confirming a truer one, the one Florence Scovel Shinn insisted was always available to you, that you are, right now, this evening. A person's supply moves toward rather than away from, not because the evidence has fully arrived yet, but because the storehouse was never waiting on the evidence in the first place. It was only ever waiting on you. I am rich now, in mind, and so I am rich in hand. And if this teaching is landing somewhere real in you tonight, stay close, because there is more waiting for you here every single day. Subscribe now, so the next key finds you before the old fear does. The fifth key is, worry is nothing more than a reservation you have made for lack to arrive. And reservations, thankfully, can be cancelled. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that worry is prayer said backwards. It is the mind rehearsing, in vivid and faithful detail, the very outcome it claims it does not want. And rehearsal, whether joyful or fearful, is still rehearsal. The subconscious does not sort your rehearsals into wanted and unwanted piles. It simply prepares the stage for whichever scene you keep running, night after night, the way a restaurant prepares a table for the name written on the card. Whether or not the guest is someone you actually wanted to seat, think of a man who checks his banking app every night before bed, not to see what is there, but to confirm what is not. He scrolls the same 3 numbers, feels the same tightening behind his ribs, and tells himself he is simply staying informed, staying responsible. But Florence Scovel Shinn would say gently, "You are not checking the account. You are feeding it a nightly instruction. You are walking up to the same desk every evening and confirming the same reservation. Table for lack, 1, and the kitchen, faithful as ever, keeps the order on file exactly as given. This happens so quietly that most people never notice they are the ones placing it. They believe the worry arrived on its own, when in truth they sent it an engraved card weeks ago and simply forgot they had done the sending." Pause for a moment and pick one real worry you have been carrying this week. Something specific, an amount, a date, a name. And notice honestly how many times today alone you rehearsed its worst version. In the shower, in traffic, staring at the ceiling. Each rehearsal, another small confirmation call made to a table you no longer want set. Now, just for tonight, I want you to speak the cancellation out loud, not as pretending the situation does not exist, but as withdrawing your reservation for its worst outcome. Say something like, "I cancel my reservation for lack in this matter, and I make a new reservation for supply instead." It will feel strange the first time. It may even feel a little foolish. And that is all right. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the feeling of foolishness is often just the old self-concept, protesting its eviction, sputtering that surely someone must keep worrying, or the world will fall apart. It will not. It is not that your worry proves the danger is real. It is that your worry, left unchecked, becomes the invitation that makes the danger feel welcome. So tonight, before the phone goes dark, before the ceiling gets its usual audience, cancel the reservation, cancel it cleanly, cancel it on purpose, speak the new table into being instead, and watch how much lighter the whole room feels the moment you do. I cancel every reservation I made, for lack. The 6th key is, gratitude is the receipt you write before the gift has even fully arrived. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that thanksgiving offered in advance is one of the strongest forms of faith available to a human being, because it proves plainly, without needing outside evidence, that you already believe the goods are on their way. Most people wait to give thanks until after the check clears, until after the door opens, and there is nothing wrong with that gratitude. It is real and it is good. But Florence Scovel Shinn taught there is something far more powerful in thanking heaven before the fact, because that kind of gratitude cannot be explained away by visible evidence. It can only be explained by faith. And faith, she taught, is the very substance the whole law of supply is built from. Think of a woman expecting a modest sum by the end of the month, a late reimbursement, a bit of overtime finally paid. She does not yet hold it in her hand, and every day it has not arrived, she has a quiet choice standing in front of her. She can check the mailbox with her jaw tight, treating its absence as proof something has gone wrong, or she can open a small kitchen notebook each morning and write one line, "Thank you for the supply already on its way to me," and carry a lightness the tight-jawed version of her could never access. Both versions may receive the very same amount on the very same date. The outer arithmetic does not change. But only one of them lived inside peace for the whole stretch of days leading up to it. And that peace, Florence Scovel Shinn taught, is itself a portion of the supply, because a mind held in peace makes room. while a mind held in anxious checking clenches tightly around the very thing it is trying to receive. Now widen the picture, because advance gratitude is not only for a sum you can already name. Think of a merchant, generations ago, writing an invoice the very morning a shipment leaves a distant port. He has not seen the crates, cannot be certain of the weather the ship will meet, and yet he writes the figures calmly, in his own steady hand, trusting the paperwork and the goods to meet each other honestly, somewhere in the middle, without either one needing to rush the other. This is exactly the posture faith takes towards supply. Not frantic, not begging, simply certain enough to put the figures down in ink before the crates ever reach the dock. A mind that writes the receipt first is a mind that has already decided the shipment is real, and a decided mind moves through its hours completely differently than an undecided one. It sleeps easier, it speaks easier, it walks into a room easier, because it is no longer carrying the question of whether, only the quiet certainty of when. Picture the way you might hold a small bird that has landed near you. If your fingers tighten even slightly, out of eagerness or fear, the bird senses it and will not come near. It is not built to trust a closed hand. But if your hand stays open, still, unhurried, the bird eventually settles there on its own. Gratitude offered in advance is that open hand, and worry, along with constant checking for proof, is the clenched one. The bird is not being cruel by staying away. It is simply responding, faithfully, to what the hand is communicating. Your supply behaves the very same way. It does not punish the clenched hand out of spite. It simply cannot settle into a grip that has not yet learned to soften. Think of an ordinary weekday evening. A father waiting to hear whether a small loan has been approved. The letter has not come. The phone has not rung. And he sets the table exactly as he would any other night. But before the family sits down, he pauses, and instead of saying grace only over the meal, he says a quiet line of thanks for the approval that has not yet arrived. His children think nothing strange of it. They simply bow their heads a moment longer, and that small, ordinary ritual becomes, without any of them quite realizing it, a receipt written in the one ledger that has always mattered most. This is not a magic trick performed once for effect. It is a habit, practiced quietly, night after night, in small, unremarkable rooms, long before anyone outside that room ever hears the news. This week, try keeping a small written account of your own, not a record of what has already arrived, but a record of what you are choosing to thank heaven for in advance. The raise not yet received, the sale not yet closed, the healing not yet fully felt in your body. Write the receipt first, the way that merchant once did at the dock. And know this is not wishful thinking dressed up in nicer language. Wishful thinking hopes and doubts in the same breath. It says I hope so, while quietly bracing for disappointment. But advance gratitude declares and expects in the same breath. It says thank you the way someone says it who has already seen the delivery truck turn onto their street. And the difference between those two postures, though it may look identical from the outside, is the difference between a prayer that drifts off into the air and a prayer that lands somewhere solid. Pause for a moment and pick one real thing you are still waiting to see with your own two eyes. A number, a letter, a phone call, a diagnosis turned kind. And instead of rehearsing its delay, write or whisper one plain sentence of thanks for it, right now, exactly as if the ink on its receipt were already dry. Notice how strange it feels the first time, and notice that the strangeness is not a sign you are doing it wrong. It is only the old habit of waiting for proof, protesting quietly at being asked to wait no longer. So tonight, before you close your eyes, write or speak one plain sentence of thanks for something you have not yet seen with your physical eyes, not as a wish sent hopefully into the dark, not as a bargain, but as a receipt, already signed, already filed in the only ledger that has ever really mattered. Simply waiting now, patiently, for the delivery to catch up to the paperwork your faith has already completed. I write the receipt of thanks before the gift appears. The seventh key is the one that changes everything else you have heard tonight, because it is not about your words or your gratitude or your worry. It is about the self who has been speaking, worrying, and hoping all along. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that behind almost every stubborn pattern of lack, there stands an old, borrowed self, built years ago out of other people's fears and other people's tired sayings about money never lasting and good things never happening to people like us. And that old self must be let go of, not murdered, not shamed, simply released, the way a snake sheds a skin that has become too small to hold what is actually growing inside it. And I want to walk through this slowly, room by room, the way you would finally walk through a house you are only now allowed to see the whole of first. Consider where this old self actually came from, because almost no one built their own belief about lack from scratch. Most people inherited it, at a kitchen table, in a worried tone of voice, from someone who loved them, and was simply repeating what had been handed down to them in turn. A father who said money doesn't grow on trees so many times it became scripture in that house. A mother who flinched every time an unexpected bill arrived. An aunt who called money the root of every family argument she had ever survived. And a child sitting quietly at that table, absorbed not the words so much as the fear underneath them, growing up to speak in that very same flinching voice without ever choosing to, the way a coat is handed to a child on a cold morning and worn simply because it was offered, not because it was measured to fit. And after a while, that child no longer feels the weight of the coat at all. It simply becomes the temperature of the room to them. And this is precisely why so many grown men and women insist, with real sincerity, that their fear about money is simply realism, simply maturity, when it was never the world speaking at all. It was only ever the coat, still buttoned. Decades later, Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this inherited self is not the true self at all. It is a costume worn so long it began to feel like skin. And here is the mercy in that truth. If it was put on, it can be taken off. It is not you. It was only ever worn by you. Second, consider what it actually means when this old self is spoken of as dying. Because this is a place where people misunderstand and grow afraid. Nothing true in you is ever destroyed in this teaching. What dies is only the false report about who you are, the borrowed fear, the inherited flinch, the old sentence that was never really yours to begin with. When Florence Scovel Shinn speaks of letting an old self go, she is describing a release, not a loss. A setting down of a heavy bag you have carried so long you forgot your own arms were never built to hold it. Think of a man who has spent 30 years introducing himself, even just internally, as someone who has never had much and probably never will, saying it lightly at dinner parties, saying it to his own children as a kind of gentle warning dressed up as wisdom, saying it to himself every time a bill arrives, and that description is not who he is. It is only a costume handed to him decades ago that he forgot he was even wearing. So long ago the seams of it feel like his own ribs now, and when that costume finally comes off, nothing real about him is diminished. If anything, for the first time in 30 years, something real about him is finally visible. Standing there, a little startled by the light, but whole. It is not that the man becomes someone new when the old self dies. It is that the someone who was always there finally stops being covered over. Third, let me give you an ordinary picture of this, because it is one thing to speak of costumes and coats, another to watch it happen in a single object. Think of a woman who kept her late father's old leather wallet in a drawer for years, worn thin at the fold, and every time money grew tight in her own life, she would remember him counting bills at the kitchen table late at night, his voice low, his shoulders tight, saying the same phrase under his breath, "We will just have to make it stretch." She never once decided to adopt that phrase as her own. and yet she found it living in her own mouth 30 years later, in her own kitchen, over her own bills, using his exact tired cadence. She did not inherit his debt. She inherited his sentence. And the sentence had gone right on working, long after the man himself was gone. One evening, holding that old worn wallet in her hands, she said, "This was his fear, not mine. And I set it down now with love for him and freedom for myself." And something in her exhaled that had apparently been held for 3 decades. This is the shedding Florence Scovel Shinn taught. Not a violent tearing, but a quiet setting down. Done once, done honestly, done with tenderness toward the ones who handed the coat to you in the first place, because they, too, you were only ever wearing what had been handed to them. Fourth, consider the part almost no one wants to hear, which is that this release requires you to stop feeding the old self, even the small comforts of complaint and identification. Every time you say, "That's just how it's always been for people like us," you are stitching the costume a little tighter. Every time you laughingly call yourself bad with money, as if it were a permanent trait rather than an old inherited habit, you are keeping the old self warm and very much alive, setting a place for it at your table every evening, and wondering why it keeps showing up for dinner. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that starving an old belief is not cruel. It is simply refusing to keep feeding something you no longer wish to keep company with. You do not need a dramatic confrontation or a tearful breakthrough. You simply stop feeding it attention, and like anything unfed, it grows quiet, then still, and one ordinary Tuesday, you notice it has been gone for weeks, and you did not even mark the day it left. It was never destroyed by force. It was never sustained by anything but your own repeated attention in the first place, and attention withdrawn is the gentlest ending there is. Fifth, and this is the piece that finishes the teaching, once the old self has been let go of, something must be spoken in its place, because an empty space does not stay empty for long. So Florence Scovel Shinn taught the practice of giving as the way to open the very channel the old self used to keep pinched shut, not giving as a transaction or a bargain struck with heaven, not giving in order to earn a return, the way a nervous investor watches a ticker, but giving as proof, spoken through action, that you now believe yourself to be a person with more than enough. When you give, even a small amount, even $5 slip to someone who needs it more today than you do, you are making a decree with your hands instead of your mouth, and that decree reaches the subconscious mind far more convincingly than any sentence spoken while sitting still, because the body is involved now, and the subconscious believes what the body does, even faster than it believes what the mouth says. Think of a woman who for years held every dollar with a closed fist, terrified that giving even a little would tip her into ruin, and one week, shakily, almost against her own better judgment, she gave a small amount to a friend in a harder season than her own, and something in her chest, some old clenched place closed since childhood, loosened for the first time in years. Not because the amount was large, it barely made a dent in her own account, but because her hand had just told her subconscious mind a new story about who she was. A person who has enough to share is never the same person as one who fears there is barely enough to keep, and the subconscious began building toward the story her hand had just told it. Sixth, notice that the old self does not always leave quietly on the first try, and this is worth saying plainly so you are not discouraged when it happens. Sometimes, days after you have released the old sentence, it tries to slip back in, wearing a slightly different coat, dressed now as caution, as being realistic, as simply being responsible with money, whispering that giving was foolish, that the new sentence was naive, that the old, tight, careful way was actually wiser all along. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this is simply the old self making its last small case for its own survival. The way a fire nearly out will sometimes flare once more before it finally goes dark, And the answer is not to argue with the flare, only to notice it. Name it kindly. This is the old self trying once more. And return, gently, without drama, to the new sentence, to the open hand, to the decree you have already begun living inside of. This is not failure when it happens. This is simply the shedding. And every snake, in the middle of shedding its skin, looks for a moment, as though caught between two selves, because it is. And that wobble is not proof the new self is false. It is only proof the old one is finally losing its grip. A seventh. And this deserves its own quiet moment, because it answers the question so many people silently carry underneath this whole teaching, which is, if I let go of the old self, who exactly am I underneath it? Florence Scovel Shinn's answer never wavered. She taught that underneath every borrowed fear there has always been a true self, whole, unafraid, already provided for, already the child of a shepherd who never sleeps. This true self was never built. It does not need new affirmations or new habits the way the costume was built out of old ones. It only needs to be uncovered, the way a window painted shut for years does not need a new pane of glass. Only the old paint scraped carefully away, so the light that was always on the other side can finally come through. This is why the process asks so little dramatic effort of you and so much simple willingness. You are not manufacturing a wealthy self from nothing. You are only removing what was covering the one you already are. Eighth. And this is the turn I most want you to carry out of tonight's teaching. The whole of this key can be summarized in a single, quiet recognition. The old self was never punishing you on purpose. It was only ever repeating, faithfully, what it had been taught to repeat, by people who themselves were only repeating what they had been taught. Generation folding into generation, fear folding into fear. And somewhere in that long, unbroken chain, you are the first one who has been handed the actual teaching, plainly enough to finally set the pattern down. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that every person who breaks an inherited pattern of lack does so not only for themselves, but for every hand that pattern would have otherwise passed through afterward. The child who will never inherit your old sentence because you finally stopped speaking it. The grandchild who will grow up in a house where money is spoken of with ease instead of dread. None of them will ever know the coat existed. And that, quietly, is the whole point. So when you release the old self tonight, you are not simply tidying your own private accounts. You are closing a door that might otherwise have stayed open for a very long time yet. Your lack ends tonight, not because you have tried harder, but because you have finally stopped dressing yourself each morning in a costume that was never yours, and started letting the truer self, the one Florence Scovel Shinn always insisted was underneath the whole time, quiet, patient, entirely unafraid. Walk out through that door, standing ajar, into the light that has been waiting there for you far longer than you knew. The old self is dissolved. The shepherd's child stands free. The eighth key is, your spoken word is the wand. Florence Scovel Shinn always described it as, and every single sentence you release today is one wave of it. Whether you notice yourself waving it or not, this key is less about one dramatic decree and more about the accumulation of 1,000 small ones. The sentence to the cashier, the sentence muttered in traffic, the sentence texted back to a friend who asks how things are going. Each one, however small, however automatic, is a stroke of the wand, and the wand does not pause to ask whether you meant it seriously. It simply moves in the direction you point it, again and again, until a pattern forms that looks, after enough repetition, like destiny itself, though it was never destiny at all, only habit, spoken so many times it forgot it was ever a choice. Consider two people asked, simply, how are things going? One answers, barely hanging in there, honestly, and feels a small, tired truth in saying it. The other answers, things are actually coming together, and feels a small brightening instead. Neither is a lie exactly. Both are simply choosing which thread of the day to strengthen with attention. The wand does not care which thread you pull. It only strengthens whichever one you keep touching. So the question is never whether circumstances are difficult. The question is only which sentence about them you keep reaching for. Think of a man in line at the grocery store. His card is declined once, in front of strangers, and in the space of 2 seconds he has a choice. He can say, under his breath, "Of course this would happen to me. This is exactly the story of my life." Or he can say, simply, "That is strange. Let me check on that." The first sentence welds one isolated incident permanently onto his identity. The second lets the incident stay exactly the size it actually is: small, temporary, unremarkable. The card behaves the same either way. The difference is which man just handed his subconscious fresh evidence for a life sentence, and which one let the moment pass through him without carving anything into stone. This is why idle talk is never truly idle. These small, offhand sentences, spoken without vigilance, are often the most powerful of all. One careful decree, spoken once in a quiet room, can be undone by 50 careless sentences, spoken all day without a second thought. And the wand works just as faithfully through the sentences you only ever say inside your own head. Think of a woman answering a work call late on a Tuesday evening. Her manager asks whether she can take on one more project. Out loud, she says, "Of course, happy to help." But underneath, silently, a second sentence runs the whole time. "They always dump everything on me. I never get to say no." And it is that hidden sentence, repeated week after week, that eventually shapes how heavy her work feels and how far away rest always seems. So the practice is not only to watch your outer speech, it is also to listen gently to the sentence running quietly underneath it, because that is where the wand is truly doing most of its work. This same wand moves through the small stories we tell about whole categories of our lives, not just single moments. A woman who says, "Every single time, technology just hates me," is casting a spell over every future screen she will sit in front of. A man who says, "I am always the one stuck in the slow line," is quietly reserving a place in every line still to come. The wand does not check whether you were smiling when you waved it. It only registers the direction. So it is not the tone of the sentence that matters most. It is the target. So the practice is not to become someone who never has an honest, hard moment. That would only be a performance instead of a practice. The practice is to notice, several times a day, which sentences you are handing your own life, both spoken and silent, and to occasionally, deliberately, hand it a slightly truer one than despair usually offers. It is not that the hard moment disappears the instant you speak differently. It is that the hard moment stops being handed a permanent address inside your identity. A simple practice for tonight. Before you sleep, name 3 sentences you spoke today without thinking, including at least one that only you ever heard, and ask honestly whether each one waved the wand towards supply or away from it. You do not need to punish yourself for the ones that waved the wrong direction. Punishment only feeds the very story you are releasing. You only need to notice, because noticing is the beginning of choosing, and choosing is the beginning of a wand finally used the way Florence Scovel Shinn always taught it was meant to be used. Deliberately, gently, in the exact direction of the life you actually want. Every word I speak tonight is a wand of light. The 9th key is, tonight is a threshold, and thresholds are meant to be crossed, not lingered at. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that a decree spoken deliberately, right before sleep, carries a particular weight, because the mind that receives it is undefended, unhurried, no longer busy with the chatter of daylight, and whatever is spoken into that quiet space is planted straight into the soil that has been growing your life all along. Most people treat the last few minutes before sleep as nothing at all, an afterthought, when in truth, she taught, It is some of the most fertile soil of the whole day. Think of a man who closed each night the same way for years, lying in the dark, rehearsing tomorrow's shortages one by one. The bill due on the 9th, the tank of gas that would not quite make it to Friday, the tone his boss used in that last meeting. He called it being responsible, but what he was really doing was handing the undefended soil the same seed on repeat, and the soil, faithful as ever, kept growing tomorrow in the shape of tonight's rehearsal. One evening, almost by accident, he stopped mid-list and said instead, quietly, "Tonight this closes, and tomorrow supply meets me at the door." Nothing outside him changed in that instant, and yet the room felt lighter, like a window cracked open after a long, stale afternoon, and morning after morning that followed. He woke a little less braced, a little less tired before his feet even touched the floor. This is what Florence Scovel Shinn meant by a threshold, rather than merely an ending, a door set on purpose, by your own spoken word, between the story you are done telling and the one you are choosing next. So this key asks only one small thing of you, before you close your eyes tonight. Speak, out loud if you can, or quietly if the moment calls for it, a clear closing of the door on the lack you have been describing for so long, not as a wish tossed hopefully into the dark, but as a decree, spoken the way a person speaks who already knows the field was filled long before they reach the gate. Your lack ends tonight, not because circumstances rearranged themselves in one evening, though sometimes they quietly do, but because you finally stopped renewing the lease on the old story and signed on to the new one, and tomorrow, when you catch yourself slipping back into an old sentence, that is all right. Florence Scovel Shinn never taught perfection. She taught return. Return to the new sentence, the open hand, the receipt written in advance, again and again, until the new self-concept is no longer something you reach for, but simply something you stand inside of. The way a house lived in for years no longer feels like something you must remember to enter. And tonight, as you cross this threshold, know the shepherd has already walked ahead of you into tomorrow. The field was lush and ready long before you thought to ask, and closing this door is not an ending. It is only you, finally, catching up to a supply that was never late, never withheld, never far away, only waiting on the other side of a door you are only now choosing to close. Tonight, the door closes on lack and opens on supply. Here is the whole picture. Lack was never a fact. It was only a sentence dressed up convincingly enough to fool you. What you bless multiplies, and what you curse diminishes. The field was filled before you ever walked toward the gate. Your self-concept is the true storehouse behind every check and every closed door alike. Worry is only a reservation, and every reservation can be cancelled. Gratitude spoken in advance is a receipt for a gift already traveling toward you. The old self, inherited and borrowed, was never truly yours, and its release makes room for the one who was always underneath it. Every sentence you speak is a small wave of the very wand you have been holding all along. And tonight, this threshold, this quiet evening, is simply the place where all 9 of these were never 9 separate keys at all. They were 9 turns of the exact same single key. The recognition, spoken once and then lived daily, that supply has never once been withheld from you, only unrecognized by you. And recognition, Florence Scovel Shinn taught, is the whole of the work. If tonight's teaching stirred something real in you, something that wants a daily home to live in, rather than a single video to be watched and forgotten, that is exactly what the Overflow Covenant was built to be. It is a gentle daily practice, rooted entirely in Florence Scovel Shinn's own teaching, that walks with you morning and evening, helping you catch the old sentences before they take root, and plant the new ones on purpose. It is $33 to join, fully covered by a 30-day guarantee. So if it is not the right fit for you, you simply ask and your money is returned. No hard feelings, no small print, You will find the link in the description below this video, and if you have been waiting for a sign to finally begin living this teaching daily, instead of occasionally, let this be it. I am the child of a shepherd who never sleeps. My supply flows to me swiftly and without delay. My word is my wand, and that is the whole of it, tonight. Whatever door has been shut, however old, however familiar, however borrowed from someone else's fear, may you feel it finally closing behind you, because your lack ends tonight, and the field, the one that was always waiting, was never as far away as it looked.